Job by Herbert E. Rieke. Part 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. His biography, which is thought by many scholars to be the oldest book of the Bible, has had a universal appeal, century after century, because this biography is not a story of long age at all. It is a very modern story, so recent, in fact, that it is not as yet finished. It is the biography of you and me in our journey from sense to soul. Some people have been playing around in chapters 1 to 3. Some seem to be stuck around 14 or 15. Many have gotten acquainted with Elihu in chapter 32 and have recognized his admonitions as those of good scientific Christianity. Some have arrived at chapter 38 and have truly heard the voice of God. A few have come to chapter 45, where their captivity also has turned, and they are getting that new lease on life, which brings unlimited unfoldment of health, harmony, supply, and satisfaction. But even those who have come to the final chapter, in some respects find that in other ways they have lessons to learn in order to find complete freedom. It makes no difference where you think you are today. We are all going to start at the beginning and see whether we can hasten a bit our progress from sense to soul, so that we can really enjoy the kind of things which are found in chapter 42. But possibly I should read a few passages from this chapter that you might see how attractive the goal is. And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. Also, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning. He had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. And in all the land were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job. After this lived Job 140 years, and saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. Things certainly ran smoothly for this great-great-grandfather. Would you like to have a history like this? What will bring it about? A better knowledge of God? That will help, but will not entirely do it. Getting rid of self-pity? Not this alone. Listening to the voice of God? That will help. But Job's captivity did not turn until he prayed intelligently for his friends. Do you know what he did? Job went into the Christian Science practice in earnest, and he started on 3 of the toughest cases. Eliphaz, who some feel symbolizes the philosophical scholar or college professor. Bildad, or should I say Reverend Bildad, the famous preacher. Dr. Zophar, the eminent physician and psychiatrist. I am not sure whether Job put C.S. after his name, acquired a special tent, called a practitioner's office, bought 2 Daniel pictures and a fern, and registered his name in the journal. But we do know that he rolled up his sleeves and went into the metaphysical business wholeheartedly and had 140 years of satisfying Christian Science practice. Would you like to experience the kingdom of heaven on earth? Then you too must get busy really praying for your fellow man. This is the most wonderful business in the world, the Christian Science practice. Now let us go back and pick up some of the threads of human experience to see what we must do in order to have the most inspiring, happy finish. Possibly some of you smiled at Job's foolish concepts in regard to God. Well, don't laugh too loud, lest you be caught laughing at yourself. We read in Job 1:6, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." Now let us get this straight. That never happened. It was just a false theological concept entertained by the people in the day of Job, and I am sorry to say, by most religious people today who believe that Satan is a fallen angel and that he can present himself before God. The devil, or Satan, has always been symbolized as darkness, and God is spoken of as the light. When darkness presents itself before light, what happens? Why, of course, darkness is ausgespielt. Your Christian Science treatment is the very presence and power of God, divine mind in action. When sickness, sin, or death come into the presence of your treatment, what has to happen? When someone calls you up over the telephone to give you a tale of woe, what immediately begins to happen, even before you have said a word? Has mortal mind talked to you during the past year? Of course not. You can see that if you believe that mortal mind comes into the presence of the Son of God and talks with him, you are entertaining as paganistic a concept as the one Job did. Does error ever tempt you to think or do wrong? If you say yes, then you are believing that Satan comes into the presence of God. For God is your mind, the one and only mind. And if you believe that error comes into your mind, you are believing that Satan talks to God. Such a concept leads to hell, even the same kind of hell that Job experienced. If you want heaven, understand that Satan cannot come into the presence of your mind, for God is your mind. Sin cannot come into the presence of your mind. Neither can sickness, lack, nor death. If any phase of evil should attempt to come into the presence of your mind, what would it immediately become? That's right, nothing. The next false theological belief that the people of Job's day accepted and the people of today still believe in is this: that God had a conversation with Satan. If you want hell, just believe that foolish lie. Could light and darkness commingle, commune, or converse? Of course not. God and Satan speak altogether different languages. If God understood Satan, there would be evil in the mind of God. If Satan could understand God, well, then there just would not be any Satan left, would there? For our leader says, quote, "The right understanding of him restores harmony, and therefore destroys error." Get this straight. Divine mind, your mind, never talked to Satan, evil, mortal mind, or error about anything. Who in this association is a son of God? Did Satan ever talk to you? Did evil thought ever come to you and tempt you? Did you ever talk back to error and mortal mind which is really just another name for Satan? And here is a good one. Did you ever ask evil where it came from? Sort of like this. Where is all of my trouble coming from? Why am I sick? Why do I have lack? This is the way it is put in the Bible. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Don't you believe a word of it. Satan never came into the presence of your mind, God. There never was any conversation going on between the forces of evil and good. Mind, your mind, God, never asked evil where it came from. For God, your mind, knows that evil is nothing and does not come from anywhere. And furthermore, no phase of evil ever told your mind, God, that it was going to and fro in the world and walking up and down in it. Just paganistic theology, nothing more. But wait a minute. Did you ever hear something like this? We must all watch out for the false theology thought. This evil influence is going to and fro in the world and walking up and down in it, almost everywhere, tempting people, hurting them, harming them, and even killing them. Don't you believe a word of it. God, good alone, is universal and ever present. The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the water covers the sea. God, divine mind, alone walks to and fro in the world, and up and down in it, and knows there is no evil there. Let us be honest. Is there a Satan, a mortal mind, an evil force going to and from in your universe and walking up and down in it? If you want hell, just believe that miserable lie. If you want heaven, realize with no reservations that there is a perfect God who has created a perfect universe, of which you and all are an integral part. Now the false theology of Job would say that God and Satan had an argument about the perfection and uprightness of Job. Don't you believe it. No such argument ever went on in regard to Job, to you or to anyone. God knew that Job was perfect, for he made him that way. And God knows that you are perfect too. And furthermore, the omniscient mind would certainly tolerate no argument on the subject. But wait a minute. Let us get down to your biography. Does an argument ever go on in your consciousness in regard to your perfection? You remember, you read in the textbook and in the Bible that you were perfect, and then there was something that argued with your mind that you were not perfect, that you were sick or unhappy or poor. Divine mind and mortal mind had an argument about you, and for a while you were not quite sure which was going to win out. In fact, you felt like a rope in a tug of war, with Satan on one end and God on the other. It is a lie, a paganistic lie, which never happened in your experience, because it could not happen in a universe filled with intelligence and perfection. If you want hell, and how many want hell, just imagine that God is wasting his time talking with Satan. Your mind is God. How could that be? If you want a double dose of hell, just imagine they are talking about you. And if you want a triple shot, just imagine that God is not sure of your perfection, and that he permits a force opposite to himself to try you out. But it is all alike, a dream. It never happened to Job. It did not happen to you. It does not happen to you. It does not happen to anyone. It could not or shouldn't happen to a dog. It is now suggested that Job is a perfect man and loves God because God has been continually blessing him. Satan is supposed to have suggested that God withdrew his blessings for a time and then see what would happen. Such tommyrot. Such paganistic trash. How could God do anything else but bless Job? God is in the blessing business. It is the only business he knows anything about. He could not withhold his blessings from any of his children. Just suppose that a human father or mother stopped feeding or clothing their children. Suppose the mother and father willingly and knowingly permitted a stranger to come into the home and destroy every toy, everything that was dear to the heart of the child. Suppose further that the parents knowingly permitted a tramp to come in and poison the food of the children until they suffered untold agony. What would you think of such parents? Why, of course, they should be locked up in a penitentiary. Could you expect children to love such parents? Never. How inconceivable it is to think of God doing what a human parent could not do. Jesus said, "If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him?" But this is all a lie, a false theological concept. God never talked with Satan, and at Satan's request, he never withdrew his blessings from Job or any of his children. But have any of you ever believed that God was withholding some blessings from you? Possibly a healing, abundant supply, or substantial happiness? Oh, pagan, pagan, pagan that you are, if you believe such trash. Don't you accept one iota of it. God could not withhold his blessings from anyone, and you know it. Sometimes we hear it said, "I am being tried by God." Theological rubbish. A perfect manufacturer does not have to try out his product. He knows it is perfect. God knows you are perfect and would not think of trying you out. Do you think God tries you out? Someone here may say yes, but Mrs. Eddy says, trials are proofs of God's care. Take that passage out of its context, accept it, believe it, and I assure you, you will find yourself going back to the old theological concepts that got Job into his trouble. Looked at in its right light, you can get much inspiration from that paragraph. You must realize that Mrs. Eddy said, "Trials teach mortals not to lean on a material staff." If you depend upon materiality, material medicine, dollars and cents, material sensation, the very opposite of God, you will have trials until you wake up. But if you don't lean on a material staff, she goes on to say, we do not half remember this in the sunshine of joy and prosperity. That is, some people think of their joy and prosperity in material terms and forget God. If you do that, you are in for a bump. She goes on, sorrow is salutary. That is, if we have been leaning on a material staff, we shall find it taken out from beneath us, so that we may learn to build our house upon the rock of principle. She says, through great tribulation we enter the kingdom. That is, if we have been dependent upon matter, materiality, dishonesty, and evil for our happiness and comfort, we will go through tribulations. Trials are proofs of God's care. That is, through trials we learn to turn from the material staff to God. Do you want trials? Expect them? But we do not have to have trials to stay at one with divine love. On page 296 of the textbook, our leader says, either here or hereafter, suffering or science must destroy all illusions regarding life and mind and regenerate material sense and self. We can learn by science and avoid suffering and trials. That is the whole teaching of Christian Science. Most of us learned not to put our hand on a hot stove by the instruction of our mother, not by the trial and error method. I never had to go out and get intoxicated to learn that intoxication was not good for me. We have all learned a great deal more by science than by suffering, even those who know nothing of the teachings of Christian Science. I have been able to help many people find health and happiness in the practice of Christian Science by correcting their thought on this one passage from our textbook. Trials are proofs of God's care. Now God is supposed to have said to Satan, all that he, Job, hath is in thy power. And then Job's oxen, camels, and donkeys were all stolen. His sheep were killed by lightning, his servants murdered by the sword, and his sons and daughters wiped out by a cyclone. Pretty rough, huh? But don't you believe a word of it. God never turned Job's possessions over to Satan. And God does not turn over your possessions, your family, your home, your car, your business, or your church to the destructive forces of evil. A God who is love could not do that. And if he could not do it, he has not done it. Lastly, God is supposed to have permitted Satan to afflict Job with boils from the sole of his feet to his crown. Rubbish. God, the divine mind, the mind of Job, did not permit a force called matter, mortal mind, false belief, or fear to afflict Job with disease. And God, your mind, does not permit any so-called evil force to afflict you with disease, imperfection, or discomfiture of any name or nature. You forever have mental dominion over your body. This is the whole basis of Christian Science treatment. Our leader says on page 378 of the textbook, disease is not an intelligence to dispute the empire of mind, or to dethrone mind and take the government into its own hands. Can you see how she is refuting this paganistic concept from the book of Job? Again she says, sickness is not a God-given nor a self-constituted material power, which copes astutely with mind and finally conquers it. On page 390 of the textbook she says, rise in the conscious strength of the Spirit of truth to overthrow the plea of mortal mind, alias matter, arrayed against the supremacy of spirit. Banish the belief that you can possibly entertain a single intruding pain, which cannot be ruled out by the might of mind, and in this way you can prevent the development of pain in the body. Let me go over this fact again. God, your mind, your patient's mind, does not permit an evil force to tempt, harass, or harm man. Mind forever stands porter at the door of thought, excluding all that is unlike good. Now, when you give Job a treatment, do not fuss around with some of the unimportant effects. Go to the bottom foot of the matter. It is false theology that needs to be handled. And when I say this, false theology, I do not mean some malpracticing monks. It is just ignorance of God, which Mrs. Eddy says produces apparent discord. Here is the basis of your denials for Job, for yourself, and for most patients who come to you for help. 1. Evil cannot come into the presence of my mind, or his mind, for our mind is God, infinite good. If evil should attempt to come into mind, it will immediately be nothing, just as darkness is nothing in the presence of light. 2. Evil does not converse with my mind or his mind, for God is our mind. You remember Mrs. Eddy's statement on page 415 of the textbook. Mind in every case is the eternal God, good. 3. Since God is our mind and intelligence, it is not inquiring as to where evil comes from, for our mind knows that evil is nothing, non-existent. 4. There is nothing to tell my mind or his mind, our mind, that there is a thing called evil going to and fro in the world and walking up and down in it. 5. Our mind, since it is God, does not act up, misbehave itself, or become confused in such a manner as to withhold from us the blessings of intelligence, of health, freedom, security, and holiness. 6. Our mind, God, does not turn our family, our possessions, our wonderful thoughts, and the effects of them over to so-called destructive, evil forces. 7. My mind, his mind, our Father which art in heaven, does not permit evil, mortal mind, false belief, matter, or false theology to take over and afflict us with sickness or disease. Our mind, God, is supreme. If a belief of sickness or disease should attempt to come into the presence of our mind, what would happen to it? It would immediately become nothing. Job, Part 2, The Practitioners. Some commentaries on the book of Job liken Job's 3 friends unto philosophy, theology, and psychology, or medical science. But you will get a lot more out of the book if you think of these 3 friends as the kind of Christian Science practitioners you are not going to be like. And why aren't you going to be like them? Well, maybe because they did not get any good results. They came to Job to mourn and comfort. Now remember this. You cannot mourn with and comfort your patients at the same time. These practitioners wept and sprinkled dust upon their heads, and sat down with Job to lament. They saw that his grief was very great. Long-faced, serious, unhappy practitioners do not heal. If you are going down into the depths with your patient, if you are going to admit that his trouble is very great, if you are going to magnify evil, you will do little good. You must keep yourself up on the spiritual highway of God with a thought full of joy and gladness if you expect to bring proper spiritual lubrication to the experience of your fellow men, that things may run smoothly for him. Well, Job starts pouring out his grief to the practitioners. In your practice, you will hear some of the same tales of woe. Some of you have already taken hours of the practitioner's time to pour out your troubles. I wish that I had never been born, said Job. Practitioner Eliphaz should have replied joyfully and confidently, Wish granted. You never were born into matter or mortality. You are not in it, nor subject to its laws, rules, or regulations. You are the immortal, perfect child of God. Indeed, this long-faced, long-winded practitioner jabbers on and on. He philosophizes. Some practitioners talk their patients out of a healing with words, empty words. Mrs. Eddy says, that individual is the best healer who asserts himself the least, and thus becomes a transparency for the divine mind, who is the only physician. Eliphaz happens to get off a few gems of truth, but most of his treatment is a magnification of evil and an attempted explanation thereof. He tells Job that all of his trouble is the result of sin, possibly some hidden sin. He tells Job that he is just a mortal. He tells him that he is born into trouble. He informs him that he, God, maketh sore and bindeth up. Please don't be a practitioner like that, long-faced, long-winded, and negative. Here is the way it sounds in modern language. It is just wrong thinking that is your trouble. Your trouble is not in your body. It is in your mind, mortal mind, and then it is manifested on your body. We must uncover all of this wrong thinking. You would not be sick if there were not some error somewhere. After all, we are just mortals working out of mortality. We have got a long way to go before we arrive at perfection. It is too bad you were born into this state of mortality. If you talk like that, if you think like that, and work like that, I would suggest that you reread chapters 4 and 5 of Job. You will find there a good object lesson as to what you should not do. Now Job wants to die. After such treatment, I would too. But Job somehow knows that such teaching was not true scientific Christianity, and so he takes on another practitioner, this one not quite so long-winded. He prides himself on being brutally frank with his human opinions. He says, "So your children were all killed. Well, they must have been very wicked children. That's all I can say about it." Think of that. He tells Job, if you wert pure and upright, surely now he, God, would awake for thee, and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. By implication, he is asserting that Job is an impure creature. Hear the modern Bildad. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. This corruption all over your body indicates that there is a lot of corruption in your mind. You must get rid of it. You must overcome it, for you will continue to suffer until you are thoroughly chastened. And then, to give such a rotten treatment some authority, he quotes Science and Health. Trials are proofs of God's care. And so Job goes down lower and lower. Now he is frustrated and confused. He says, "I am full of confusion." He says a lot of things he doesn't mean. Any decent practitioner should handle confusion and frustration, and should quiet his thought. Not so Zophar. He argues with Job. He berates him for claiming he is innocent of evil. He makes the things of God very mysterious. He accuses Job of wickedness. But let us look at the Zophar of 1949. Yes, man is perfect, but you have to realize it, and it is a very difficult job. God is all, but you must demonstrate it. And I am telling you, you are doing a very poor job of demonstrating God. You will hear him say, "You ought to go to such and such a lecture. It is very deep." Or, "Have you read this book or this lecture? It is awfully deep." Christian Science is one of the deepest subjects in the world. You can never understand it all. Error is very subtle. There are 7 forms of animal magnetism. You have to be careful so that you are not handled by one of them. That is your trouble. Animal magnetism. You are guilty of it. If Job was confused before, now he is even more so. And he told the practitioners what he thought of them. This might happen to you too, if you do not give the right sort of treatments. In fact, I hope it does happen to you if you do not stay with the simplicity of truth. Perfect God, perfect universe, and perfect man. Job said, I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Yea, who knoweth not such things as these? An intelligent practitioner would rejoice at such an admission. May I tell you a little secret of my practice? I never have a new student of Christian Science, never a poor student, an ignorant student. My patient is always a perfect Christian Scientist. When he leaves my office, I say to myself, there goes a perfect Christian Scientist. You see, that makes my work easy. For if I am seeing my patient as a perfect Christian Scientist, he certainly will do his part in studying and applying the truth. But Job's practitioners were hurt and resentful because Job told them what he thought of them. He said, Ye are forgers of lies. Ye are physicians of no value. Mrs. Eddy says, give sick people credit for sometimes knowing more than their doctors. She might also have said, more than their practitioners. Remember that you never want to depreciate the understanding of your patient. Your job is to help your patient realize that he knows the law of God and how to apply it. Your job is to help him appreciate the omnipresence of the one divine mind. Well, Job comes back for 2 more treatments from Eliphaz, 2 from Bildad, and 1 from Zophar. Why he kept taking more when he realized how inadequate were the first 3 treatments, I do not know, unless he had a hard time to get away from them. Sad to say, this often happens in our experiences today. An individual will realize that he is not getting what he should have, but the practitioner holds on to him, and he has a hard time getting up courage enough to say, I do not want any more help. I would suggest to you, if you are ever put in such a position, if you are not getting help the way you should, be courageous enough to ask the practitioner to discontinue treatments. I am not going to go into these 5 treatments in detail, but will give you a few of the highlights. I am suggesting, however, that it would be profitable for all of you to read these treatments in detail sometime. Put them in modern language, and take them as an object lesson as to what you are not going to do. Job laments that he is a mortal born of woman, full of trouble. Eliphaz agrees. What is man that he should be clean? And he which is born of a woman, that he should be righteous? Behold, he, God, putteth no trust in his saints. How much more abominable and filthy is man? Isn't that just about the most terrible stuff you ever heard? In chapter 16, verse 11, Job reveals the basic error to be corrected in his thinking. But the practitioners did not discern it at all. Job says, God hath delivered me to the ungodly, and turned me over unto the hands of the wicked. Bildad makes no correction of this, but preaches some more hellfire and brimstone. Really, he does. And it is real brimstone he preached. Brimstone shall be scattered upon his habitation. In his last treatment, Eliphaz is beside himself. He is going to get at the error even if it kills the patient. He lets his imagination run wild and accuses Job of all sorts of sin in the hope that somewhere along the line he might hit the mark. Hear this one. Is not thy wickedness great, and thine iniquities infinite? He accuses Job of stripping the naked of their clothing, that he has failed to give drink to the weary, that he has withholden bread from the hungry, and sent sick widows away empty, that he has broken the arms of the fatherless. I think he meant to indicate that Job's sins are sins of omission. Job denies such sins and goes to Bildad for one more treatment. Bildad tells him that nothing is pure in God's sight, and he ends up with this: how much less man that is a worm, and the sons of man, which is a worm. Hideous, isn't it? Man, just a worm of the earth. Well, make sure that you never say or think anything that would make someone else feel like a worm. Husbands, remember never to do anything that would embarrass your wife and make her feel so unnecessary, like a worm looking for a hole to crawl into. And wives, oh, they never would be guilty of thinking of hubby as the worm, would they? Of course you would not. But maybe you might have a patient sometime that needed to be freed from the false worm theology of Bildad. You remember that man who gave you that awful raw deal, the worm? Joe Stalin, the worm, or maybe even Roosevelt, the worm. Your boss, the worm. Maybe your competitor, the worm. Sometimes the patient who doesn't pay his bill, the worm. The ungrateful worm. Sometimes in thought, many of us have not been very far from the unscientific treatment of Bildad. Yes, the treatments from these three practitioners end up not only on the note, but even the word, worm. Now Job prays for wisdom and understanding. He is beginning to discern that his trouble is not to be found in sin, but rather in ignorance of God. He says, "But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding?" He finally arrives at this conclusion. Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. He is certainly beginning to grasp the pathway out of trouble. Then Job does an intelligent thing. He begins to think with gratitude about the good he has experienced in the past. He recounts the good he has been able to do for others. He acknowledges that he has not been guilty of sins of omission. He then goes on to rejoice that he has also not been guilty of sins of commission. He has been faithful to his wife. He has been charitable, kind, just to all. He has not worshipped material wealth. He has not rejoiced in the misfortune or destruction of those that disliked him. He has been hospitable to all, especially to strangers. He declares, "Till I die, I will not remove mine integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast, and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me, so long as I live. You see, Job was a righteous, decent, fine man. In fact, God said he was perfect, and Job knew it. And he was not going to let any Freudian psychoanalysis, doctors, ministers, or even so-called Christian Science practitioners convince him that he was a miserable sinner, a worm of the earth. The words of Job were ended, and we read, "So these 3 men ceased to answer Job, because he was righteous in his own eyes. They had tried to break him down and make him accept an unrighteous concept of himself, of man, but they had failed. Job believed in the spiritual and moral perfection of man. He had demonstrated it throughout his human experience, and nothing would move him from this eternal truth that man is perfect." Part 3. A Good Christian Science Treatment. A young man by the name of Elihu had been listening to the treatments Job received, and had observed that the results were not satisfactory. He at first hesitated to say anything, because he was much younger than Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. After all, they were very experienced practitioners, with their names in the journal for many years. One had been taught by Edward Kimball, another by Bignell Young, and a third by Mrs. Eddy herself. Of course, I do not mean that Mr. Kimball, Mr. Young, or Mrs. Eddy taught any such stuff. After all, Elihu had just had class. You could not expect very much from him. He had not had very much experience. Hear his own words. "I am young, and ye are very old. Wherefore I was afraid, and durst not show you mine opinion." But finally he realized something had to be done, or Job was a goner. He had studied carefully these 8 treatments, as I have asked you to do, and he had learned what a Christian Science treatment should not include. He is full of enthusiasm. He cannot hold back any longer. These are his words. "Behold, my belly is as wine, which hath no vent. It is ready to burst like new bottles. I will speak, that I may be refreshed." There is none of the long-faced, serious, sour us here. He says, there is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them understanding. Isn't that refreshing? He knows there is an answer to the problem, and that the answer comes from God, divine mind. Furthermore, he knows that this mind is right there with man, with himself, and with his patient. Isn't that an excellent manner to approach your work as a practitioner? Let me quote it again. "But there is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them," and notice he said them, "understanding." Here is another wonderful thing about Elihu's approach. Let me not, I pray you, accept any man's person, neither let me give flattering titles unto man. He is saying, I am not going to approach this problem from a personal standpoint. I know that evil is never a person, place, nor thing. I am going to plead the case scientifically for truth, and not for person or personalities. And he was not going to say just a lot of sweet things that might please Job's ears, flattering titles, as it were. On the other hand, he is not going to talk about the wickedness of man. My words shall be of the uprightness of my heart. Your heart, our heart. He gives himself a good treatment before he starts on Job. Hear this one. The Spirit of God hath made me, and the breath of the Almighty hath given me life. I hope you will offer such a prayer of affirmation before you go about your work. The Spirit of God hath made us, and the breath of the Almighty hath given us life. Here is another good point for every practitioner. Behold, I am according to thy wish in God's stead. A good Christian Science treatment is the very word of God expressed. Elihu realized his oneness with this divine mind and knew that he could only express the ideas which proceed from this one and only mind. Next, he assured Job that he was not going to try to scare the hell out of him, as the other practitioners had tried to do. Behold, my terror shall not make thee afraid. You see, he was going to do as our leader admonishes us in Science and Health, page 411. Always begin your treatment by allaying the fear of patients. Elihu goes on to say, neither shall my hand be heavy upon thee. Oh, how we need to deal compassionately with our patients and help to make Christian Science easy for them rather than difficult and a burden. Finally, Elihu proceeds and goes right to the root of the difficulty. You have been blaming God for your troubles, Job. Behold, in this thou art not just. I will answer thee that God is greater than man. And just a little later, Elihu puts his finger more definitely on the solution for Job's problem. Thinkest thou this to be right, that thou saidst, my righteousness is more than God's? There was no place where Job had used these words, but this was the basis of all his complaints. All of his trouble came from rotten theological beliefs about God. You remember how he complained, God hath delivered me to the ungodly, and turned me over into the hands of the wicked. In substance, this is Elihu's presentation. Job, would you poison your children's good? Of course not. You forever did everything you could to make it comfortable for them. And Job, would you stand by and knowingly permit an outside force to come in and poison your children's food? Of course not. You are too righteous for that. But yet you have been believing that God is withholding his blessings from you and has turned you over to evil forces, that he has turned you over to Satan. Can you not see, Job, that you are therefore believing that you, yourself, are more righteous than God? The fact is that any righteousness you have is but a reflection of the righteousness and glory of God. Elihu continues, Therefore, Hearken unto me, ye men of understanding. Don't you like it that he called Job a man of understanding and not a worm? Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should commit iniquity. Note this carefully, that Elihu did not object to Job thinking of himself as a righteous man. That is the way we should all think of ourselves. What Elihu insisted upon was that Job should recognize God as 1,000,000 times more righteous, and that his perfection was but a reflection of God's perfection. You see, Job was clear on the subject of the perfection of man, but he had not been acknowledging God as perfect, nor had he been seeing a perfect universe. The other practitioners had been trying to get him to acknowledge the imperfection of man. Elihu was helping him to acknowledge the perfection of God and the universe, that he might be every whit whole. Elihu goes on to inform Job that his trouble is just a bad, foolish dream, for which God is not responsible. Divine mind is right there, seeking to wake him up. For God speaketh once, yea, twice, yet man perceiveth it not, because he is in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falleth upon men. In the next verse, Elihu goes on to say that divine mind is right there to waken us. Then he openeth the ears of men. I love this next statement of Elihu. If there be a messenger, an interpreter, one among 1,000, to show upon men his righteousness, then he is gracious unto him, and saith, Deliver him from going down to the pit. That was Elihu's job. And that is your job as a practitioner. You are a messenger from God, an interpreter of truth, one among 1,000, and it is always your job to show a man his uprightness, and not to convince him of his sins. You must be gracious unto your patients, and prevent them from going down into the pit, from becoming depressed, discouraged, disappointed, and unhappy, if you would deliver them and help them to find a ransom. In helping Job uplift his concept of God, Elihu continues, Is it fit to say to a king, Thou art wicked, and to princes, Ye are ungodly? Then how much more should we never think of our Creator as ungodly? For if the Creator is wicked, unjust, unkind, that is the way one would expect his creation to be. For creation is like the Creator. And it is this imperfection of creation which we are seeking to avoid. Elihu points out that to attribute injustice and wickedness unto God is to lead your thought into a state of mental rebellion. We hear much these days over the air and through the newspapers on the subject of cancer. Medical science has been seeking to find a cure. Someday humanity will awaken to see clearly that cancer is a state of mental rebellion. In proportion as men indulge in such mental rebellion against God, it will externalize itself in a rebellious, riotous disease called cancer. Some people are always crabbing about things, about their lot in life, about the government, about their family, even about themselves, and about the powers that be, God Himself. You know, the word cancer means crab. You will remember that I included crabbedness as one of the sins to be avoided by scientific reasoning as to the perfection of man. Dissatisfaction, discontent, unhappiness, discouragement, blues, grief, all such rotten stuff is outside the experience of man. We will have none of it. Make sure that you help every patient to prove that he is one of the happiest, most satisfied, contented, encouraged, cheerful creatures in the universe. If you help him along that line, causing him to see that there is a happy, perfect God who has created a happy, perfect universe, of which he is a part, you will win at least 99 out of 100 cases. Elihu also proceeded and said, "Suffer me a little, and I will show thee that I have yet to speak on God's behalf." That's our work too. We must speak on God's behalf to our patients. You see, Elihu was emphasizing the first line of the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," as you were taught in class to begin your treatment. He says further, "I will fetch my knowledge from afar, and will ascribe righteousness to my Maker." Can't you just hear the hallowed be thy name in it? Remember that many of your patients only need an improved concept of God. Help them acquire that, and the healing will follow without effort. On page 275 of the textbook, Mrs. Eddy writes, "The starting point of divine science is that God, Spirit, is all in all, and that there is no other might nor mind, that God is love, and therefore He is divine principle. To grasp the reality and order of being in its science, you must begin by reckoning God as the divine principle of all that really is." Elihu puts it this way, "He that is perfect in knowledge is with thee." Oh, what a wonderful scientific statement. What a marvelous treatment in Christian Science. He that is perfect in knowledge is with thee. You must declare that idea often, that infinite good may unfold for you and your patient. Then Elihu goes on to tell of all the wonderful things that God does. "He openeth also their ear to discipline, and commandeth that they return from iniquity. He delivereth the poor in his affliction." Here is another good treatment. "God exalteth by His power." You can use that one often. Let us all use that truth together here collectively. Will you repeat with me? God exalteth by His power. After Elihu has discerned spiritually that Job has responded to the idea of a perfect God, he goes immediately forward into the subject of a perfect universe. He is now dealing with the second part of the Lord's Prayer. "Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven." He talks about the drops of rain which God causes to drop and distill upon man abundantly. He points out what a wonderful thing the sun is. He speaks of the authority and the command that God has over the clouds. Then he makes this important suggestion to Job. Hearken unto this, O Job. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. You will help your patients a great deal if you will cause them to stop, stand still, and consider the wondrous works of God. You can see how Elihu is now helping Job to uplift his concept of the universe in which he lives. Job needs a little more of this good medicine. Dost thou know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of him which is perfect in knowledge? He speaks of the sky as a beautiful, molten-looking glass. After very effectively uplifting Job's concept of God and the universe, Elihu does something that every intelligent practitioner should do. He gets himself out of the way, out of the picture, so that God, divine mind, has a chance to express himself through the thought and activity of the patient. Elihu says, "Shall it be told him that I speak? If a man speak, surely he shall be swallowed up." What he is saying is that it is not his personal opinion that counts. It is the truth he is speaking, which will heal the sick. He is uttering the same fact, the same idea that our Master expressed centuries later when he said, "It is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you." Jesus knew that it is the impersonal, spiritual Christ truth that heals the sick and comforts the sorrowing. Jesus knew that God communicates directly with man, not through person, but through the divine mind. Elihu had discerned the same spiritual fact. Hear his parting remarks, a wonderful benediction for every Christian Science treatment you give. Touching the Almighty, we cannot find him out. He is excellent in power, and in judgment, and in plenty of justice. He will not afflict. Men do therefore fear him. That is, stand in praiseful, prayerful awe of him. You see, Elihu went to the root of the matter, in the beginning of the treatment. And when he winds up his treatment, he permits no doubt as to the error that was corrected. God will not afflict. What happened to Elihu we do not know. We only realize that he got himself out of the way so that divine mind could express itself through Job. I like to feel that he went to work on his next case. He had uttered a wonderful amen on this one and could certainly bring many blessings to others. Someone asked me why Elihu did not go on and prove the perfection of man after he had straightened out Job on the subject of perfect God and perfect universe. He did not need to. Job was already clear on that point, the righteousness and perfection of man. Part 4. Facing Reality. It is now recorded that God answered Job out of a whirlwind. Now it wasn't a cyclone, It wasn't even a voice from without. It was the divine voice within, uttering itself. It was perfect intelligence expressing itself to and through Job. It was a whirlwind of thoughts that swept his consciousness clear of the old theological beliefs and brought him to the new realization of perfect God, perfect universe, and perfect man. You know how we think by association, a chain reaction as it were. Well, that is the kind of whirlwind chain reaction that Job experienced. One of the first thoughts that came was this: "Gird up now thy loins like a man." In other words, stop acting like a crybaby. Think this thing through. It would be a good thing for all of us to listen quite occasionally to this admonition from Divine Mind. Gird up now thy loins like a man. Stop whining. This inquiring as to the why of evil. Next we find the question, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth?" Of course, Job was there, because mind was there, and Job was the eternal expression of that one perfect mind. He was never born of a woman into matter or mortality. Remember, to start right is to end right. To start with mortality, with so-called human birth, is not to start right. I would say that at least 99 out of 100 people misinterpret this passage. Most Christian scientists answer it in the negative, that of course they were not there. Where were you when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Now, mind begins to unfold to Job that there is a beautiful, harmonious balance in the universe. It is recounted how mind says to the proud waves, "Thus far and no farther." The wonderful nature of light is described. It is emphasized how darkness and the works of darkness flee before the light. The mysteries of snowflakes and hail are described. Mind truly appreciates the way in which the clouds carry the water over the earth and send down rain, even where people do not dwell. Mind unfolds the marvelous manner in which the stars and planets are held in their courses. You of course remember the passage, "Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons?" In poetical language, many of the wonders of the sun, the earth, and the sea are described. Mind reveals to Job how marvelously the animals, such as the deer, provide for their young, how even the wild donkeys are cared for, and how the unicorn finds its freedom. Job thinks further on the marvelous beauty of the peacock and the ostrich, and realizes that there must be a divine plan and power in back of all creation. Job marvels at the strength of horses and stands aghast at the wisdom of the birds and the way they are able to provide for their young and be guided by a keen sense of direction. As Job meditates for a considerable time on the perfection of God and the universe, he is awakened to see how wrong he was to criticize God and his creation. In fact, He is so impressed by the perfection of God and the universe, and sees how wrong he was, that we find him uttering, "Behold, I am vile." But divine mind does not let him get away with such old theology. Immediately there comes into his consciousness the answer from the Lord. "Gird up thy loins now like a man." It will never heal any situation to acknowledge that God and the universe is perfect, but that man is imperfect, vile, a worm, etc. This forceful command immediately comes from divine mind. "Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty." Since God is perfect, and he has created a perfect universe, it follows necessarily that man, a part of that universe, is beautiful, wonderful, and perfect. Job is here admonished vigorously to deny every quality of thought that would deny God, whether it be rage, wrath, pride, wickedness, or hypocrisy. He was told to do this, just like we are told in the Lord's Prayer, to deny any quality of thought which would deny God. "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." Mind then tells Job this, "Then will I confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee." In other words, it is Job's right thinking about God, the universe and man, which shall save him from all trouble. Job now goes on to admire further the wonders of the earth, the sky and sea. He is made to see that man is not a mortal, born of woman, but rather an immortal idea, forever living in the eternal God. Hear these lines. "Hath the rain a father? Or who hath begotten the drops of dew? Out of whose womb came the ice? And the hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it?" There is only one answer, of course. God is the father and mother of all these wonderful things. And so the lesson is brought home clearly to Job, that just so man is not a mortal, born of woman, but an immortal, never born into matter, never dying, forever living in God, divine mind, the source of all being. Now Job's thought is thoroughly uplifted, and he can say, "I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee." He is determined, henceforth, not to talk unless he knows what he is talking about. He sees that ideas which do not proceed from principle are not ideas at all, but illusions. He is determined to follow the instruction given later by our leader, page 467, having no other gods, turning to no other but the one perfect mind to guide him. Man is the likeness of God, pure and eternal, having that mind which was also in Christ. Then comes this famous passage, "I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee." God is no longer a theological mystery to him. The perfection of God, the universe, and man has become a solid reality to him, which can be demonstrated. You would think that this would be the end of Job's spiritual awakening. But as I mentioned in the beginning of the paper, Job's captivity was not turned until he prayed for his friends. You see, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar were a part of Job's universe, and he could not be entirely free and happy until he was seeing them aright. Possibly you will remember the statement I gave you in class from Mr. Seeley that you cannot get into heaven until you see your brother there also. We must uplift our concept of all the practitioners we have called on, even the doctors, ministers, the Christian scientists with whom we have talked, our neighbors, our friends, our relatives. We too must truly pray for them in order to find that peace of mind which God has ordained for us. Job has learned the significance of our leader's admonition on page 343 of Miscellaneous Writings. Too soon we cannot turn from disease in the body to find disease in the mortal mind, and its cure in working for God. Too soon you also cannot turn from disease in the body to find disease in the mortal mind, and its cure in working for God, divine mind. Have we been considering the biography of Job? No. We have been studying your human experience. I would not be surprised if during the past year some of you had not been found complaining in one way or another. Why does this error hang on? I study my lesson and try to be as decent as I can. Then why am I not healed? Why don't I have normal abundance? What is wrong with the powers that be? That is the symptom of Jobitis. Shake yourself loose from such dust. Awaken from the paganistic concept that your righteousness can exceed God's righteousness. Would you withhold any normal good from your daughter? Then why do you believe that God is withholding some good from you? Would you stand in the door and knowingly permit a tramp to come in and harm your children? Then how could you believe that God might permit some evil force to interfere with your healthy, happy, normal unfoldment of activity? That's it. Turn on this lie as baseless as it is base. If you are decent, God is much more so, and your righteousness is but the reflection of the perfection of God. If you do not want a whirlwind to come and destroy your home, your family, your business, your health, and happiness, if you do not want robbers to come and carry your goods away, I would suggest that you make certain you permit the whirlwind of rejuvenated thought to blow through your consciousness, your sense of values, to literally whirl away the ashes of false theology, lies about God, the universe, and man. Don't let it be just a little soft south wind. Let it truly be a cyclone. Be content with no concepts less than perfect God, perfect universe, and perfect man. Remember that Mrs. Eddy says, only through radical reliance on truth can scientific healing power be realized. If you will do this, you will be able to heal your friends. You will have a good practice in Christian Science, and you will find the 4 following important things. 1. Everlasting health. 2. Abundant supply. 3. A wonderful family. 4. A long life of useful activity.